Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And today we're going to be talking about Under the Skin, a 2013 sci-fi film directed by Jonathan Glazer, co-written by Glazer and Walter Campbell from Michael Faber's 2000 novel. Starring Scarlett Johansson, shot by Daniel Landon, and scored by Mika Levi. So that's what we're doing today. And
so we covered Birth on an earlier episode.
Yes.
I can't for the life of me remember if it's the same cinematographer or not. I don't think it is.
I can check.
Okay, because it looks different, but then again, it's a very different style of film.
It is not the same cinematographer. That film was Harris Savides, so this is, he worked with somebody new for this film.
Okay, that's what I figured, because if you go between Birth and Under the Skin, they do look so different.
Yeah, significantly. And it's also worth noting that I did some research into the production of this film. Under the Skin, he was working on a draft of the screenplay before he made Birth, but even though these are back-to-back in his filmography, there's basically 10 years separating the two. Like, he made Birth, and then it took him 10 years to get Under the Skin made, and that's, that was his next film, and now he's...
Yeah, the whole process is very interesting.
Yeah.
So he got the book by... Michael Faber?
Michelle Faber. Actually.
Michelle Faber.
Yeah.
Which I have read, by the way. And the book is very different. In the book, and full spoilers going ahead, just in case anybody hasn't watched the movie yet. And I'll try not to spoil the book too much.
I don't really mind, but...
But, I got to talk about some of it. So, in Under the Skin, the book, it seems to take place much more in the countryside. The majority of it, like when she's driving around, she's picking up hitchhikers. It seems like in the countryside. And then another major difference is in the book, they went explicitly into what the character was, like what they were doing and what she was like as an alien. So in the book, they're like sort of like dogs. They're like dog-like creatures. And it's explained that the main character had all these crazy surgeries to look how she does. And it was very painful for her, and she's, So in that regard, it's similar where they're wearing sort of a disguise. Yeah. But in the film, it's much more of a, like a suit. And in the book, it's much more like she just completely had her body surgically altered.
Well, I haven't read the book, and this is my first time seeing the film, but the interesting thing to me is that I was always like, this is a sci-fi film, this is about an alien. But there isn't even anything in the movie that really, like, clearly indicates that she's an alien, even.
No, the only reason you infer she's an alien is because of the book.
Yeah, and the context of so it's just the movie, and the movie, I hear in the book as well, it's also kind of explained what her purpose is. And
yeah, in the book, and this isn't giving too much away, but in the book, the people she picks up are for food.
Yeah.
She picks them up and basically they get turned into food that's then, transported to her home planet.
Yeah. In this, it is completely unknown, really, what she's doing.
Yeah, and this you really don't, you get the sense there is a hierarchy. You get the sense she's a little lower on the totem pole.
Yes, there is.
She's like kind of a worker drone. But you never really understand why she's procuring all these men, why they have to be men, for one.
Yeah,
or even really what happens once she gets them.
Yeah, no, so just to dive into some of the impressions, I quite enjoyed this movie. It had been, recommended to me for a long time as like a...
I'm glad you actually liked it, because sometimes it can go the other way where if someone's, been recommending something to you for so long and then you actually watch it, you can be disappointed.
Yeah, but this one paid off, I thought. But it is a movie I would describe as very opaque is the word I would use. And that's not a bad thing. but it's in the sense that this movie, and it kind of reminds me of the tenor of a lot of like contemporary like weird fiction, whatever you want to call it, but it's it's not about explaining anything, or even like there isn't even a clear like thematic concern necessarily. It's just really putting you in a very alien experience, you know? It's very abstract at points. Kind of it's just a, and it's very it's worth noting, I think it's not just visually, but it is very different from Birth, which I wound up seeing before this for this podcast. We covered Birth like, I don't know, a few episodes ago. The one thing that links the two to me is Jonathan Glazer's apparent affinity for taking big Hollywood actresses and putting them in just totally strange and uncomfortable and alienating movies, it's a pretty admirable thing to do. Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, I think one thing about this film that is so bizarre is like, first of all, Scarlett Johansson does a really good job.
Yes.
Which is refreshing. Because sometimes, she'll be in the Avengers movies and you can tell she doesn't have to try that hard. But yeah, this one, she's very good in it. And to the point where like she's nude for like so much of the movie. And she's one of the most beautiful women in the world. And I'm still sort of like, huh.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, no, I mean, well, Scarlett Johansson, she's been in kind of definitely like kind of bland, big blockbuster movies, but she's also done a lot of like interesting and challenging stuff as well. I mean, she did Marriage Story is what she's most, which is great. She was also, this must have been really hard, when she was in Spike Jonze's Her as a Siri app, basically. She doesn't.
Oh, that's right.
And
yeah.
that, I mean, I was very impressed with her performance. And in that movie, she's just a disembodied voice, but she conveys a lot of humanity and emotion. Whereas in this movie, it's a very physical performance, certainly, but she's
just sort of not there.
She's totally alien. And I saw, going to the nudity, there is some article saying that like this is a major Hollywood actress doing extended nude scenes in a film, but it didn't occasion any like wow hype or whatever like it normally would, because the tone of it is so weird, and like it's not objectified or sexualized at all. It's just very like it's such a different type of nudity that it didn't even occasion controversy or debate as it usually would.
Yeah, I mean, it's borderline like an anatomical text, or like going to the zoo and seeing a monkey walking by.
It's very clinical and cold. But yeah, it's a very powerful performance, and it really does hinge on her being able to sell this really who for most of the movie is a blank slate of a figure, but she's very convincing in this specific role.
Yeah, I think just because we covered it, her performance isn't exactly like Billy Bob Thornton's in The Man Who Wasn't There, but there's definitely elements of it in that it's a very strong performance.
Yeah.
Which must have been very hard because you can't really rely on like over emotionality. Like you're kind of just have to be there, yeah.
It's very it's like the opposite of the type of acting we normally expect in most movies, that you typically want to be able to latch on to the protagonist in some way. But, with The Man Who Wasn't There, and then with this character who doesn't even have a name at any point in the movie, it's very alienating, and I don't want to use the word cold, but like cryptic, and at points clinical. It's very, detached, and that's actually hard to do. So it's quite admirable to see an actor be able to play somebody who's like virtually unreadable.
Yeah, I think one of the strong points of this film is not only does she come across as very alien, but the way the film is shot, it actually makes everyday, what to us would be mundane things, seem very alien.
Oh yeah. There's some sequences that are purely abstract, like the opening, which I thought was really striking and interesting, and that it's like, I don't know, it's like a series of lights and elliptical circles, like moving into these configurations, and it eventually forms a human eye. And it's, I mean, I guess I read it as like her birth or her creation or something like that.
Yeah, I read it as like her eye was being
Yeah,
made.
something like her, being, having a form or something like that. But then just the location photography, which is very beautiful. It was shot in Scotland, and just, I mean, it's gorgeous to look at like the mountains and the fog and all of these like beautiful locations. But yeah, it is kind of, it's not a typical way of shooting landscapes in film. It's very like, I don't know, alien is the right word. It's quite atmospheric and strange. One of the interesting things, one of the more, technically impressive things about the film is the use of hidden cameras. Are you familiar with that aspect?
Yeah, no. So the way they filmed this was they actually, instead of having what they normally do, which is just like an enormous rig set up on the car.
Yeah.
They managed to hide cameras inside of this van, and I'm not sure how it works, because it's like, I guarantee you there were some people they didn't ask if they could be in the film.
No, I mean, what I read was that a lot of the men she picks up were not told that they were being filmed, and they were only afterward told, and they had to sign a form.
Yeah, I'm sure there were plenty of performances where they're like, no, and then they couldn't use them.
Yeah, and then some of those men wound up going even further into the film and going into the weird, sex void that she takes them to, I believe. So that's like...
Which is really, I mean, pardon the pun, but it's very ballsy, because it's like, they're basically, I mean, not to get too lewd about it, but I'm pretty sure both of the men who fall into this, or sink into this pit of like...
goo.
Black liquid, I'm pretty sure they both had erections. Now, whether those were real or just like
they were erect. They were erect.
I mean, like, so it's like you're not even just agreeing I'm going to be naked in this movie that you randomly filmed me for. I'm also going to be erect.
That's crazy. I mean, like,
I don't think I'd agree with that personally.
I know, it's very like, I don't know if those men...
I might agree to be in the van scenes, but I'd be like, yeah, I'm not gonna get naked.
Yeah, it's like, and I was kind of surprised because, and I guess this points to a harmful double standard in our culture, but, the naked female body is very familiar to film viewers, but you don't usually see naked men in film. It's kind of, infrequent. And then...
No, and if you do, it's usually like you never see their front genitals.
No. And I mean, even in movies where you do, I remember like a mutual friend of ours, Michael Adams, I think it was him, was talking about Midsummer, like, minor spoiler, but a male character has sex in the film, and there's just no erection at all, so he was, like, a little unconvinced. But in this film, not only are they naked men and you're seeing the front, but they're also, like, at least partially erect, and it's very, like, I don't know, that's, like, it's surprising to see in film.
No, it's very shocking. I know, because like I take note whenever I actually see this will sound bad either way, so I'll just say it. Whenever I see an erect penis on film, note. I like take note of it. I mean, in like not in a porn, like in a regular mainstream film or television show. The only other place I can think of it, and I believe it's like sort of also digital, but the first season of American Gods, there's a gay love scene between basically a djinn, like a genie, who is like pretending to be a taxi driver, and one of his fares he picks up. And so it's not only like important because it's like just a gay sex scene that they don't like cut from and anything, but it's like there's definitely like full erect penis,
Yeah. The only other film I've seen I honestly think an erect penis in is probably Persona and maybe one of Pasolini's trilogy of life movies, but I don't think so. Oh, maybe. But
Yeah, so normally you only get it in like, you know, like a heavy art film.
yeah, and this is kind of a
Yeah, I guess it is sort of an art film.
because it was released by A24, which it's not an art house studio, but it isn't quite a mainstream studio. But it is a film that, you know, would be put into a bunch of theaters, not just art house theaters. And it is.
I mean, it's on Netflix, so that tells you something.
And it's Scarlett Johansson, who's a very well-known actress, very well celebrated. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm perpetually shocked that he was able to get like Nicole Kidman and Scarlett Johansson. I guess not that shocked because they're very well written and well directed films.
Yeah, but nonetheless, they're so weird.
But nonetheless, yeah, it's definitely like it's not like they're easy roles. Like he makes them look really bad.
No, it's not and it's not roles that you can trust an audience will show up to either, which I think is depressingly reflected that in the fact that while this had an 8 million budget, it only scored 5.2 million pounds at the box office, so it is considered a...
Yeah, I think a film like this, though, they make all of it back in
probably.
DVD sales.
That is probably true. That makes sense. But getting to more to the film itself, I don't really know if I can comment on the thematic elements of it because I'm still absorbing it and trying to work through it. Certainly it seems like there's something in there about gender and, you know, women and men, but I can't quite tell what it is.
I've seen it 3 times now. I've told you this.
Yeah.
I don't know that the film really comes down on gender roles one way or the other.
No, yeah.
I think it hints at the way I think that men are just like more or less like, you know, led around by their dicks and will go into harm's way just at the bat of an eyelash from a pretty woman.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
but it's not entirely that.
Yeah, I don't even know if the film may, and this again is not a criticism, I don't even know if the film may have a specific theme in mind, you know? It may just be...
I mean, I think the main purpose of the film is to convey a very alien atmosphere or vibe and to sort of get into the head of someone who, whether they're an alien or a demon or a fairy or whatever the hell she actually is not a human being and is watching human culture from the outside and then trying to participate in it as well as they can.
Yes. Later in the film, about after meeting with a man with, I believe, elephantitis, which is a facial deformity.
And that's a real man, too.
Yeah, it's not makeup, which I thought was admirable, you know, because those people don't tend to get roles in films, but here it's usually if they need a person with a deformity, they use facial makeup or something like that.
Right, and good on him too, because like not only did he agree to be in this, I mean, it's a very uncomfortable scene, we'll get to it, but he also agreed to also be naked.
Yeah.
So it's like the fear of being like, if I was in a movie, I would be afraid of just being naked, but this man has had to deal with, you know, being stared at his whole life, and then he's acting in a major film, and then on top of that, he's also getting naked.
It's very brave, and I applaud it.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, it's after this meeting. So, well, let's go roughly through the plot. So for the first half of the film, she's kind of cruising for these men. And she takes them to and I find the fact, in retrospect, that a lot of these conversations were filmed hidden. It makes the men's advances kind of weirdly, like, charming almost, or gross. It depends on the guy. But it's like...
Well, because there's a very strong cinema verite vibe, because a lot of people didn't know they were being filmed.
Yeah, and it's just like...
So it's not like movie dialogue where someone's trying to hit on someone. It's like a real person doing
like
it.
It's kind of like it's so rewarding.
I mean, one wonders how they didn't immediately go, "Oh, you're Scarlett Johansson."
Yeah, but... I don't know. No, apparently, according to Scarlett Johansson herself and Jonathan Glazer, it wasn't an issue. I mean,
Maybe it's because she's normally blonde. I don't
they
know.
said that was one of the reasons she has black hair, but she's still recognizably.
She still looks like Scarlett Johansson with black hair.
But yeah, I mean, it's, and also just to talk about the footage itself, for something that was filmed like discreetly with a hidden camera, it looks great. It doesn't look like it was like a covert shot. It's
No, it looks like they had like a legitimate rig, or like they were just
lit well or whatever. So yeah, it's very it's very impressive in that respect. But she takes them. These were my favorite scenes in the film, personally. She takes them to this black room. It's like a void with like a reflective surface, and she strips and they strip. It's very like balletic, you know, like almost choreography in the way they're moving.
Yeah, like it's a give and take. It's like she's walking backwards, usually disrobing, and then they're walking forwards, disrobing.
Yeah.
One of them is very hilariously like they cut from a nightclub where he's dancing to the room, and he's still sort of dancing.
Yeah, that's
while
pretty
he's
funny.
stripping.
That was pretty funny. There is humor in here, which surprised me. I mean, that's the most pronounced instance of it, but
There's another one, but we'll get to it when we're going in order.
yeah. And they just, it's very, I was like wowed by the images. You know, they
It's
just,
very evocative, and I think, being perfectly frank, I'm fairly sure Stranger Things stole that device for one of their seasons, because it's basically the same exact
I
thing.
thought that as well. Whatever 11 does when she goes into psychic, whatever. It's very, but yeah, the men walk forward and just sink into this black liquid.
And I'm pretty sure that they somehow did this all practically.
Yeah, I think it was a pool with like a floor that lowered as they were walking or something like that. I don't know.
Okay.
It sounded I'm getting up the Wikipedia page. Let me just see. I'm curious. Okay.
I mean, it seems like there were mirrors on the floor at some point.
Yeah. Oh, the crew built a bespoke set with a reflective floor, blackout, and custom lighting. The actors were filmed walking into a pool whose floor sank as they walked. And there was some computer graphics there as well.
Yeah, and they probably had to go over it a little bit, but
Maybe the erections were computer generated. But
who knows?
but no, and then I think it's the second time we go to this room with Dancing Guy. We see what happens to the men who submerge, and it's the creepiest thing. I loved it. It was just great.
Yeah, it's one of the creepiest things I've ever seen on film. It's basically, so he sinks into this kind of black ocean.
Yeah.
And it's really bizarre too, because they don't seem afraid. They
No.
don't seem like terrified.
And
They seem just sort of like mildly like, huh, this is odd.
And it isn't like they're not like drowning or anything. It's not.
No, you. It seems like they can breathe.
It's
and
not
they're
like
normal.
water even. It's just some sort of like space. But yeah, she's one of the eerie things to me is you see her walking off above them, that she's just exiting, and they basically, true to the title, become bags of skin. Basically, is that?
Yeah, they sort of like puff up like a balloon.
Yeah, and then like in like a snap, they're just like a deflated paper bag. You know, it's very. And he lingers on these images of the skin just kind of like drifting around and like curling, and it's just very uncanny and unsettling. I mean, like,
Yeah, I think I brought up the balloon because it's sort of like they're like a balloon that's been in the water and then they pop.
yeah, they bloat beforehand and then they're just like these like, yeah, it's like deflated, and they intercut this with very striking images of like, I don't know, like what looks like blood or fleshy material going through a drain or a trough.
I mean, you're led to believe that's the inside of that person that was just transported to this weird kind of drain.
Yeah, and then there's just intense red images that are very abstract. I think it's a very beautiful film visually, and I was like, some of the abstract stuff was, especially with like that intense white light against the red backdrop, it was very, very striking. But
Yeah, I think the most pronounced thing about Under the Skin, and what makes me really excited for him as a director going forward, because you sort of saw this in the fall, also the stylistic elements.
yeah,
Which, to be fair, if you've seen his music videos, like they're in there,
Yeah.
like his stylistic elements.
honed his
I mean,
skill.
in terms of like having like faces that are slightly deformed and
Yeah,
strange, kind of abstract visuals.
yeah. His next movie, which is also apparently taking him 10 years to make after Under the Skin, because it's been 7 years and it'll probably be a few years before it comes out.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he's doing a movie about Auschwitz, which seems like a left turn, I guess, although the fall kind of indicated that thematic direction, I think. But he says that he wants Auschwitz to be a character and it to be like the place to be a character and he says he hasn't seen that done in Holocaust movies.
No, and I was gonna say, your first response when you hear, oh, there's gonna be another, movie with Nazis or the Holocaust is, I hate to say it, my first response is just like another one.
I mean, there are a lot of them, and a lot of them are really bad, but
And some of them aren't even bad. They're just like, it's
whatever.
like,
Yeah.
if you've seen Schindler's List, it's like, okay, well, the next one is basically just doing the same thing.
I'm very interested in the history, but I've been generally disappointed because so few movies really get under the skin, wink wink, of what made it. I mean, like, you can get to the obvious atrocities of it on the surface, but few movies really get into the deeper, like, truly, like, existential and philosophical horrors of it. And I think,
yeah, like the day-to-day of just like actually having to live there.
And being-
like, there's films that approach obviously the terrible parts, but
I mean, like, yes.
it's all terrible, but I mean, like, the kind of the calm before the storm moments. I don't know that we really have many films with that.
The only film, I mean, the best film I've seen about the concentration camps is probably Night and Fog, but that's half an hour and it's all documentary footage, so I guess it has a bit of a one-up in that it's actual images. And then I think, movies that get to the real horror of fascism and Nazism that I've seen, which would probably be Come and See and Salo, are the two main ones. Those don't take place in concentration camps recognizably. They're more... One is actually the war front, but it gets to this similar, like, essence of what was going on, and the other is a total fiction. But at any rate, watching this film and Birth and getting a kind of handle on Jonathan Glazer's stylistic sensibilities and his tone, I think he's going to make...
But the thing is, if you go back and watch one of his first films, it might have been his first film, Sexy Beast, also totally different.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But I trust him to make... I've liked everything I've seen.
Yeah, the through line is, I have yet to see a Jonathan Glazer product that has been bad.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, especially with the direction of The Fall, and end this film, there is some kind of harrowing scenes here. I find the baby stuff on the beach pretty teeth grindingly uncomfortable at points.
Yeah, that is one of the more uncomfortable moments.
When the dog
And
is
it's not
drowning.
very Hollywood either, because, the Hollywood version would be like maybe the baby sitting there,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be like screaming.
And they would
Like
also
this.
keep cutting to the baby, but like he just has it screaming, like sometimes off screen, sometimes in the back of the frame, and it's very
Like it really gives you the sense this baby has just been here or has been on that beach for hours. And it's so heartless and like
and the
just
guy
it
comes
shows
back
what the
to pick up
the
like
lack of
yeah,
emotions that these characters have.
he comes back to pick up like the clothes or something, but he leaves the baby, and it's very like it's upsetting. I find the scene where the dog is drowning and the woman is drowning is also upsetting, but less so, obviously. But
I mean, it's upsetting too because it looks so realistic.
it's very
It's like you
realistic.
wonder how they actually did that. They must have had somebody. I mean, they must have had people off screen that had like scuba gear, maybe, or something.
Yeah, I mean, I've not been to Scotland, but I have been to Ireland many times, and in a similar like those waters are ice cold, and those waves aren't faked. It's very, you know, they're intense if you get further out. So, I mean, it's another aspect of this film that feels almost uncomfortably realistic. But yeah, I think it's. I mean, I'm again at a loss to try and decipher what it means, and maybe trying to decipher what it means is the wrong thing to be doing. Maybe that's like the wrong way to approach this film.
Yeah, sometimes I think that the purpose of the film is just you're seeing things the way Scarlett Johansson's character see
Yeah,
things in this just sort of cold, clinical way without any emotion applied.
yeah, and
So it's like someone is drowning. There's no, oh my God, someone's drowning. There's no, hooray, someone's drowning. It's just, someone is drowning.
yeah, yeah. Baby's crying.
Baby crying. Yeah, it's very, like, it's almost animal in that regard, like very reptilian almost.
Yeah, it's strange. But the interesting thing is, after meeting that man with the facial deformity, she decides. I don't know if she decides, but it seems like she's trying to make a bid for humanity. Like, she goes to a. She gets rid of that, like, kind of menacing fur coat, first off, I think, and then goes to a restaurant in the Highlands and is trying to eat cake, but it's
Really hates it.
she hates it, or can't eat it or something, and she she seems to form a relationship with this man who somebody pointed out the irony, like they go to a castle together and he carries her over a puddle, and it's like, you know, she doesn't care about the puddle, she would just walk right through the it's like it's kind of, you know, a man doing this very sentimental romantic thing to this like literally non-human entity. But when she examines her body, like she's familiarizing herself with it, and then when she is starting to have sex with this man, it almost feels like romantic to me. That's how I felt during it. Like, that was the one break in the emotionless tone, especially with the music, which we'll talk about the score a little bit, but it's an amazing score. But it seems like she's like actually evincing some capacity for tenderness in that moment, which of course falls apart as soon as he starts to presumably attempt to penetrate her. Then she like bolts upright and is examining her genitals, and it's very strange. But
I mean, I think that's one of the funnier,
yeah,
one of the funnier moments in the film is like, it's pretty much assumed that as soon as he penetrates her, she sort of freaks out, like she didn't entirely know what was going to happen.
yeah,
And so she grabs a lamp, and then it's like she's just sitting on the edge of the bed, just like really intently staring at her genitals
Yeah, that's
while this
kind
man
of
is sitting on the bed, kind of like, what?
yeah, it's very I was assuming it was because there was something like under the skin again, but like that there was some sort of thing, or it could be that she didn't know what was going to happen, and that was it. But um I don't know, there was something kind of tender in that scene to me that you don't see anywhere else in the movie. maybe
It's true.
maybe in the interactions between her and the deformed man, where it's so sad when he's coming up to her and he's like, "This is a dream," is what he keeps saying, and it's like that's so.
Yeah, it's some really heartbreaking. Like their whole exchange, like she picks him up and he's like, I'm going to the grocery store and it's at night. And she goes, why do you shop at night? And it's like, it would seem really cruel if you didn't realize she was an alien or kind of not human.
Yeah, yeah,
And it would seem like she was being sarcastic, but it's like she proceeds to be like, don't you have any friends? And he doesn't really
a
answer. And
girlfriend.
don't you have a girlfriend? And he doesn't really answer. And it's just really hard to watch because you're like, that's rough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the interesting thing about this scene is that she doesn't the question she's putting forth. It's like she doesn't seem to notice any difference between this man and any of the other men that she's met with, which, I mean, that does show, I mean, because human people would judge that man differently than the other men, but she doesn't seem to absorb that there's like a significant difference, which, is representative of like an alien gaze. She compliments him on his hands, like, you have beautiful hands, and it's just very, I don't know, it's like there's an interesting interplay in that scene between coldness and warmth almost. I found that aspect, those kind of conflicting elements very interesting. But yeah, and then in the conclusion, she exhibits genuine fear, which we haven't really seen from her up to that point, right?
Yeah, no, I think the fear that she shows at the end of the film is probably the most she emotes in the entire film.
Yeah. It's she's in the woods. She's presumably left this lover, I guess. I don't know, but she's left the man she was staying with and is walking in the woods, falls asleep in a cabin. There's a very beautiful shot of her sleeping, like superimposed over images of the trees in the forest swaying. It's very evocative stuff. But she wakes up and a strange man who she met earlier on in her walk is attempting to rape her. And she runs, and he starts chasing her. And he knocks, and she's very scared. She lets out like cries of fear, which it's again, as you said, you don't really see her emote anywhere else in the film, and it's a very suddenly, it's like a burst of actual like frightening things going on, compared to the other scenes, which are much more subdued and disturbing.
And it is an interesting flipping of the script because they apply the same element of the score they've used when
the
basically she's stalking her prey,
Yeah.
like these men she's finding,
yeah,
and they flip it for this one where it's this man stalking her.
Yeah,
But
I
it's the
noticed
same
that.
music, so you get that sort of interplay.
There's they use the same track or whatever that played when she was devouring men. So there is like a kind of link there that's very interesting, and that she's still being followed by men, but in this time she's running away from men, not leading them into a whatever dimension or substance that she was before. But then at the end, I mean, she gets knocked to the ground and her skin peels, and it's evident that there's some sort of like dark skinned, like almost like with the baldness and lack of distinct facial features, it reminded me of like a mannequin almost beneath.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what interested me, and maybe I'm reading too much into this detail, but what interested me is when she takes off her own, like the Scarlett Johansson face, and holds it in her hands. The Scarlett Johansson face is still blinking. Did you notice that?
I did notice that, yes.
I wondered what that. I mean, maybe it's just another weird detail, but to me, it almost seemed like it was trying to say that this persona had taken on a life of its own that was distinct from maybe the entity beneath it, and that it had succeeded in some way in attaining a level of humanity because it's blinking and it's crying, and I don't know, it was a strange detail because I was expecting her to take it off like a costume basically, but it's still moving, and I don't know, there's a lot of like things to wonder about with elements like that. At the
Yeah, no, there's I have a different let me redo that. I have a different interpretation most of the times I see it. The first time I think I thought similar, like, oh, like this, the outside is like, it's almost automated,
yeah.
or perhaps, like perhaps it's robotic in some ways. And that would make sense because under her skin, the creature she is, it doesn't appear to really have eyes that blink or anything like that.
No, not really.
So at first I thought maybe it's automated to do that, like it's almost like animatronic.
Yeah, oh, maybe.
But then you can also see it as like, well, maybe the skin itself on the outside, maybe that is a separate like entity.
Yeah, maybe.
And it's just sort of been worn by this other creature, which is somehow, I mean, there's no answer either way, but that the interpretation that the skin itself has sentience and then the thing under it is different is just very chilling.
That is chilling. I mean, and it could draw attention into the way I'm just like free speculating at this point because I don't, I don't know if this film is trying to say anything, but one of the fun things about it is that it gets you wondering about a lot of things, but it's almost in like, if we're going to take it to a human level, although it isn't a story about an alien, like the difference between the sometimes very pronounced difference between the person we project to the world and to other people and the person we are inside, which is sometimes much less clear and unformed than like the people we adopt, the faces we adopt in public, and I think that what you're saying, it is an uncanny and frightening idea that there's like something of her that's existing on the outside and something completely different on the inside, and that these two things are almost separate, like on different levels of sentience, is very, it's a frightening thought, but it's also, I don't know, resonates with human experience in a way that I think is it's very interesting.
I mean, I think this is one of my, even though it's never explicitly said this is a film about aliens, I think it's one of my favorite films about aliens.
Yeah.
Because it actually captures
the experience of something alien.
The experience of seeing something and you just can't classify it. I think a lot of the alien films, we've been so pre-programmed at this point where it's like it's going to be humanoid and it's going to be gray and it's going to have the same size eyes that they normally, this
Yeah.
very big eyes on either side, and you're going to know that's an alien. And sort of by the very definition of alien, it's no longer alien because you know what it is.
Yeah. But
this is truly alien where you are never really told what it is.
Yeah.
You don't know if it's from space. You don't know if it's from a different... I mean, it could very well just be from kind of a dimension overlapping our own.
Yeah.
It could be a fairy.
It could be something terrestrial. It could be anything. But
it could be, like a changeling type of a thing.
But it captures something more fundamental about aliens than we see in most alien movies. And I can't think of many movies that really do that really try to put you there. Especially within the science fiction genre. The closest I could right now think of, although I could probably think of others if I tried, was maybe Arrival. But even that...
Yeah, something like Arrival. But even Arrival...
winds up humanizing them a little bit at the end.
Yeah, well, even Arrival, they're still playing off of established... And, everything's playing off of established alien lore. But with Arrival, you get a ship.
Yeah.
So, like, from the beginning, you're like, this is an alien spacecraft, and you can kind of infer from there. With Under the Skin, from the beginning, you don't get any of that. You get possibly an eye being formed.
Yeah, but even that is like... those images are abstract enough that you could project a lot from them. That's what I assumed, it was an eye being formed. Somebody was like, it could be a representation of her coming to Earth with the eclipse lake.
It could be, yes.
It could be a lot of things. So, but yeah, no, it doesn't. It's not. Again, there are no clear indications what she is or where she's from or what the point of her whole mission is.
I mean, I think from the written perspective, from the script level, that's really genius because from what I've read, his first attempts were very much just to do the book just in a visual form.
Yeah,
and he tried that and just found that it wasn't working for him.
Yeah.
So what he did instead was went back and he captures the spirit of the book in that it's this, this very alien creature.
Yeah.
That is incorporating among human beings and sort of in some way using them for nefarious means.
Yeah.
So he captures that in Under the Skin while not having to... And I still enjoy the book for what it is, but he doesn't have to do what the book does, where it explicitly says there were dog-like creatures.
Yeah.
And their planet has this, like... They go into how in the planet there's, like, levels. So, like, the main character in the book, she's lived on these underground levels where they're kind of like a slave class.
Yeah.
And they're like working their way up, and that's why she's like basically harvesting these humans because she's trying to work her way up. And it's interesting, but I can see why you would maybe try to adapt that and think this is just too ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I mean, like for me personally, here's what it reminds me of. And I have nothing against like high sci-fi stories where it's like getting into the lore and the background and whatever. But it's
indeed, I really love that style of sci-fi too.
It reminds me of like I'm going to use a term I have not heard myself say in ages, but the Cthulhu mythos stuff to me. And that like Lovecraft started off writing these stories to capture a sense of like cosmic loneliness and terror, right? But then people got bogged down in the specific mythology and systems he'd created, which are fun, but you see them gradually get less and less alien and more familiar because it becomes like terminology after a point where it's just...
I mean, the biggest issue I think with Lovecraftian adaptations, particularly with Cthulhu, and I say this as some asshole that was on a Lovecraftian podcast for like 5 years. So trust me.
Yeah,
I've had fucking hours to talk about this. But the beauty of Lovecraft's work is that it is like Under the Skin, where you get the sense that he is exploring and he's trying to put a very vague face to a feeling or to an emotion.
Yeah.
And what happens is people have to quantify things. So very quickly it went from Cthulhu happens to have bat wings just at the moment to Cthulhu is a thing with a squid face and bat wings and it's X height.
Yeah, I mean, it
When it was always supposed to be, I think, an avatar. It's always supposed to be just the form that Cthulhu decided to take that specific time.
and that in his true form it would be incomprehensible or not, you wouldn't be able to approximate it to anything. And I think
right, yeah.
I mean,
Scott R. Jones calls it the kaiju problem.
yeah, is that
where you take Lovecraft's creatures, and since they have been described in some way, you are trying to do it in a visual form, you pick a form,
yeah,
which is fine because you sort of have to, but the more you pick that form, someone else picks the same form, and suddenly it's no longer an approximation, it's literally this is what it's supposed to look like, which was never what Lovecraft was after.
and it's also and because, like, you know, the thing, like, the drawings I've seen of Cthulhu in general, and they're great drawings. There are a lot of great artists
but
who
yeah,
do
it's
it.
the kaiju problem. They all sort of look like a vague Godzilla.
But they're like, it's cool. Like, oh, he has tentacles, and like, you get like down to these like, and then you hear people arguing about like, you know, what society Cthulhu had in the ancient times, and it's just like, this is getting so far. The whole point was to capture something that wasn't.
Oh, I've had so many arguments with someone who will remain nameless about, like I'll go into it briefly because I don't like self-inserting into this shit.
No, yeah.
I, like any horror writer, at some point I attempted to write my Lovecraftian pastiche.
Yeah.
And in my story, it's like I was playing off of, there's a part in the story where it's like artists are inspired or kind of driven for whatever reason by Cthulhu.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to do that, and someone was vehemently arguing with me, Cthulhu doesn't get involved with humans. And I'm like, then how come humans know about him? How come humans dream about him if he doesn't get involved?
Doesn't Lovecraft in the original story explicitly say that he influences the dreams of artists? Isn't that like the first part?
It's literally something like that, but this person was trying to say, well, he's completely alien. Like, he doesn't care about humans because there's that line about humans. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure it's like you can not care about ants and be aware of ants.
Yeah, that's the best, if I'm thinking of the same meme.
But that's the shit I'm talking about, though. I spent fucking years arguing with people when I think Lovecraft,
didn't care.
Intentionally didn't want to bog it down with well, he can talk to people in dreams,
Yeah.
but he doesn't choose, because it's like the more you try to butterfly Cthulhu, the less interesting that character. Even saying he or she, we're gendering fucking Cthulhu, which never had a gender.
I know. I
don't think he has a big swinging dick,
That's
know?
Pretty, I mean, the people who get worked up about Cthulhu's gender, that has to be the funniest thing. But, I mean...
But people will spend years and people will spend lifetimes arguing about this stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could get into a whole Lovecraft conversation, but
I know, I don't want to, though, but I know what you're getting at, though. I think the beauty of Under the Skin, it is sort of approaching that very Lovecraftian, I am attempting
to show something.
Somewhat show this inexplicable, kind of ethereal...
unknowable thing.
Unknowable source. Yeah,
it's just to wrap that conversation a bit, it's these original concepts were made in response to the cliches of Gothic and ghost fiction, right? To create something that was really challenging and different. But people basically turned Cthulhu into a vampire, if you know what I mean. A cultural property that has a set you know,
It's just like what we did to Frankenstein's monster.
yeah, like
In the I believe the original title is the postmodern Prometheus,
the modern Prometheus,
or
yeah.
the modern, not the postmodern.
Yeah.
Blah. But what we did was we took a very vague, like he's been cobbled together from the dead parts of other humans,
Yeah.
and then we had the universal picture, which, sure, it was great.
It is, yeah,
But pretty soon, Frankenstein's monster was green.
yeah.
Never green in the, you know.
Well,
It's never explicitly said he's green in this. Suddenly, he's always got a blockhead and little bolts in his neck, and we've quantified it down to now it's like we've got him as a cereal mascot.
yeah. I mean, the common link between these characters, like Cthulhu, Frankenstein, whatever, is that Dracula to a degree, although he is based on but
Yeah, he's based on Vlad Tepes.
yeah, but in the sense that these characters were created as to push the boundaries of what was known in horror fiction or in general fiction at the time. There wasn't really horror fiction in Mary Shelley's time in the traditional sense, but in Mary Shelley's time, the stories were all about ghosts and religious visitations, and she was like, what if we did something that was new and cutting edge, and that it's created by man through science and it's an individual. And then Lovecraft was, what if we embodied the unknowable forces of nature and space and time in unknowable terrors. And with this film, getting back to Under the Skin, it's it's not, the stuff about it being a canine alien that's surgically transformed for this mission to turn people into meat, that's all cool.
It's certainly interesting, and I think it worked for a book.
Yeah, but this film is getting more to that almost primal level where it's just something.
Yeah, I think wisely, as I was kind of trying to, I don't know if I put a pin on it too well. As I was trying to say, I think what Glazer wisely did was he took his early draft, which was much more concrete,
yeah,
and decided it would be better to kind of pull it back and kind of boil it down to its essential elements. It's this unknowable sort of alien presence that is for some reason acquiring humans. And that's the beauty of the book and the beauty of the film.
Yeah. I read about how him and his co-writer, they worked for a very long time on the screenplay, and with each draft, progressively less and less detail was added to the point where there's no backstory in this. And I introduced it as a science fiction film. There's nothing even recognizably.
There's no there's no recognizable science.
It's not even. It's something that's. I would honestly, personally, not that genre really matters, but I would personally. My experience of this film was more akin to a horror film than a science fiction film, in that
I would say horror, and even to that end, depending on your interpretation, it could be seen as a fantasy film.
Yeah, it could be absolutely anything, which is the whole point of creating a character like this.
I've heard some very convincing arguments that that she's a fairy.
Yeah, that has relations to the old conceptions of fairies, creatures that live in.
Yeah, again, we co-opted fairies and made them these cute little Disney things, but early fairies are fucking terrifying.
Yeah, they're
these sort of unknowable, strange creatures in the forest that demand you give them a baby or something.
Yeah. And they make people disappear, and people are never. It's very that.
Yeah, and I think I brought up the changeling, but the whole thing about the changeling is that it's this weird kind of mannequin-esque, very blank form that can change itself into the guise of a human child.
Yeah. And that and it being in Glasgow could suggest that as well, and that it's a Celtic. Well, I don't know if
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily he was trying to do that, but it's
no.
definitely, I think what's great about the film is it is never explained. So you can watch it one time and think, okay, let me try to watch it as if she's a fairy and see how that plays.
Yeah,
Or
it's
the first time you're thinking she's an alien, so how does that play? Or then you're just like, it's who knows what it is, an interdimensional being. How does that play?
yeah, it's very, but ultimately, and those are fun games to play, and I will be revisiting this film because it's very rewarding. But ultimately, the question of what she is ultimately irrelevant because she's something that can't be known in not by any metric of human understanding, and the film is just describing this phenomenon of her moving through the world, a total like there's an interesting counterpoint in those scenes with the men early on. Like the men are very human and recognizable, and it just puts the little rituals of like flirting and courtship and all of that into this weird perspective where like they're using pickup lines on her, and it's just
I mean,
like
pickup lines I feel like are already archaic.
yeah, yeah. But they become divorced
They
from
yeah,
the
they become
normal.
even more bizarre and ritualized when they're in this film because like
You're,
they're all very similar too. It's like you're very beautiful or you're gorgeous, and
yeah.
then she's like, yes, like
In the same way that the landscape looks transformed, it's by putting somebody so alien into our culture and context, it forces us to look at our culture and context with different eyes and like, well, that is, I mean, like it forces us to engage with the strangeness of everyday life, and
I
that's
mean, not to sound like an idiot, but another film that does it well is the first Terminator, where you have, or
oh
the
well,
first
maybe
and the
yeah,
second, you've got this robot and it's just sort of like just trying to
indifferent.
figure out what the hell's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, this is like, this is an abstract and opaque film, but I don't know, something about the structure, it doesn't seem inaccessible to me. Not really inaccessible. Like, it can be difficult and frustrating, and, again, much as the people who went to see Birth for Nicole Kidman probably came out a little upset and surprised. The people who came to see this for Scarlett Johansson, um, it's not an experience that I expect many of them were anticipating. But I do think there's enough. There's a difference between a movie that is completely alienating and has nothing to give the audience, and a movie that, while presenting a very alien experience, is still like watchable and you can enter it in a way that, you know, more removed films might not. So this is a film that, I mean, we've been talking.
It has a surprising amount of humanity for a film about someone who doesn't really have human emotions and doesn't understand humans.
Yes, and it's compelling, like you want to see what happens even if you don't know what's happening or why it's
And
happening.
you get to see the whole gambit of humanity basically. You see kind of the skeezy pickup artist type dudes.
Yeah.
But then you also see this very charming man who goes out of his way to help this woman who he doesn't even know and lets her sleep in his house, and
Yeah.
he really isn't like doing it just to get sex out of her. Like
No.
he doesn't even seem interested initially.
He
Like
cares. And you
he
see
cares. He's just making
the
her food and giving her a place to sleep, and then at the end you get probably like the worst humanity has to offer, which is basically like a serial rapist
yeah, you get the
who lights things he doesn't understand on fire.
yeah. And it's kind of I mean, I don't know if it's heartbreaking, but it's quite sad when she gets lit on fire. I don't know why. But this is a movie that somehow makes you at least a little bit empathize with something that literally isn't human in any meaningful or traditional sense.
And I think one of the stronger decisions for me in the film is when she is lit on fire, she runs, but she doesn't scream. It's sort of like once her skin is off, all of the vocal qualities and the emoting, it's just gone.
And the nerve endings of it, you know.
And then, yeah, it's like you almost, you barely, I don't know, maybe she's in pain. You don't even know.
It's very, I mean, it's very...
And you don't even know, to be fair, you don't even know if she really dies. Like, that form gets burned down, but they really
the ash
harp on this shot of the ash floating up, and there's a cut to one of the men in the motorcycle kind of staring at the ash as it's floating. So you could infer from that they can just sort of like
mutate into another.
Go find where the essence of this thing went and just sort of remake her.
Yeah, it's, I mean, with the...
That's inferring a lot, but you know, it's like, I don't know. The way the film is made, I never got a concrete sense that there's a definitive, like, this creature or this thing is dead.
Yeah.
It could be. It obviously could be. But there's no definitive, like, it's dead.
Yeah. It's...
Because there's no definitive, like, what it is.
Yeah, so you can't make any assumptions like that.
Because, like, that very first scene could be showing that she sort of exists in this sort of bodiless form initially.
Yeah. She doesn't need a body exactly. We should probably, you know, the runtime's getting a little on the long end.
Yeah, we should probably wrap this up. I mean, generally, listeners, if we get past the hour mark, you know that it's an interesting film. At least we have a lot to talk about with it. I would highly recommend this film, as stated. And I know most of the films we've covered so far, I've seen at least twice. But yeah, this is a film that I think stands the test of time. I mean, it was made only in 2013, but I think you can watch this in 2033 and still get the same stuff from it.
Yeah, it's a film that I think will be studied for a long time by, like, students, and I mean, its reputation will only improve. But that said, it already, I mean, despite the commercial failings, it has a pretty good critical reputation, and
I mean, the thing is too, and with a film like this, you do want to talk about the plot and, you know, what is she and all that stuff, but from a strictly technical level, it's a very well shot film. It's got some really interesting abstract scenes. The score is really great.
The score is amazing. I wanted to find a place to shout that out, but it's very mesmeric, you know. It's like it holds up to analysis and critique, but at the same time, just from a strictly filmic level, it works really well. Yeah, I mean, it's almost, I mean, the dialogue, what there is of it in the film, there isn't much, and it's not always very meaningful what the dialogue is. So
no, some of it, I mean, the first half hour, I think she's just asking for directions.
Yeah, it's almost,
and it's interesting in that she's sort of subtly like, do you have a family? And if they say yes, she's like, okay, thank you. But when they're like, oh, I don't have one, she's like, oh, okay, do you need a ride?
Yeah. But it's like, at points, it's just basically a procession of images, which, I mean, I don't really subscribe to this, but a lot of critics will say that cinema attains its purest expression without dialogue when it's just images, because that's the distinguishing characteristic of the film form is cinematography and editing. And this film,
I don't necessarily agree with that either.
I don't agree with it.
Why people say that? Because I mean, strictly speaking, I do think the stronger cinematic films at least have that element to them that they can hold up visually.
Yeah, I don't entirely subscribe to that, and there are a lot of very dialogue-driven movies that I love. But
yeah, like, I mean, like Citizen Kane, which is largely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made.
Full of dialogue.
Rosebud, you say that, everybody knows what that means.
Yeah. But, nonetheless, there's something of that statement in this film in that it really is. You don't get much about the plot or mood from the dialogue at all. It's just the faces of the actors and the lighting and the abstractions of it at points, the general mood. You get all of that from the cinematography and the score. So I highly recommend it, both as a compelling thing to talk about, but also a visual and cinematic pleasure in general. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go, because I perpetually forget to do this, we have a Patreon.
Patreon.
So if you're a fan of this, we've got 2 mini episodes up. One is actually about the short film The Fall by Glazer.
Yeah.
Which I believe he did after Under the Skin.
That was fairly recently.
Yep. Fairly recent, yep. And we also have one about the Midnight Gospels.
Yeah. Great show.
And I'll probably be posting some essays and more mini episodes and all of that stuff. So
check it out.
Yeah, if you feel like spending $1 to get extra content from us, please do. I'd appreciate it very much.
It's nice.
Otherwise, pretty much our exclusive hub on the internet, despite the fact that we could have a website, but I'm very lazy, is at Celluloid Sits, CITZ on Twitter. That's primarily me, but Brian hops on occasionally.
Very occasionally.
But that's like our, that's where I do the day-to-day kind of stuff. Usually it's just me retweeting shots from films or, news about a new movie. But that's sort of our hub. Like, I'll link the episodes there. And kind of the official, website for the show itself is anchor.fm/celluloid. Could be Celluloid Citizens. I can never remember if I shortened it, but
it's on Anchor. In any case,
if you Google Celluloid Citizens and Anchor, it'll pop. And even if you Google Celluloid Citizens, you can just do it that way.
Yeah. Come and say hello. And give us $1 a month if you want to.
Please give me $1 a month, yes.
It would be very nice. All right, but until then, I'm Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And don't go into dark rooms with mysterious women.
I make no promises, but